everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to do a whisper video about some of the lyrics in Joanna Newsom's music and highlighting some of the words she uses because she has a very unique and interesting set of words she uses. If you're not a listener of her music, Joanna Newsom is this incredible musician, and she's a harpist, and she plays also the harpsichord and a couple of other instruments, but her work is incredibly odd. She has this very strange but amazing voice, and her work has kind of a lot of folk influence and a lot of classical influence, and she has these really great arrangements and really great orchestration to her work. Oftentimes really long songs and very, very poetic and very, very just nuanced and deep and with a lot of references. So I'm not going to be going into her references much today or trying to decipher what she means because I'm not sure anyone completely knows what she means except herself. But just explaining a couple words or a few words that she uses because she uses a lot of archaic terms. So I also wanted to make this video because I heard that she is having a baby soon, which is very exciting. And I wanted to congratulate her because she's one of my favorite musicians right now. And let's just get into some words. The first word I wanted to talk about that she uses. Oh, I also should say that I looked up some of these words, and if any of them have a wrong definition or I'm misinterpreting them, I'm sorry. I am not a linguist, and I did okay on my SATs, but not perfect. So, don't sue if some of these are mispronounced. But I'm doing my best. The first word I'm going to talk about is is. Is. Because is the name of one of Joanna Newsom's albums. And it's spelled Y-S. And I've heard a lot of people talk about her album called Wise or called Y-S. And it is pronounced Is. I think it's kind of funny. I don't think she says the word in the album too, so it's very understandable to not know how to pronounce it, but it's pronounced Is. And Is refers to a mythical city on the coast of Brittany in France, which was swallowed up by the ocean. So Joanna Newsom uses a lot of mythology. So I'm not sure if the album is supposed to be a retelling. If it is, it's kind of a strange retelling of that story. But anyways, Is the album. The second word or phrase I wanted to talk about is Care Paravel, which is a literary reference. Her line in one of her early albums says, "With 4 fine masts and 18 sails, it's bearing on Care Paravel." And Care Paravel is the castle in Narnia, in the Chronicles of Narnia, where the kings and queens rule. So, Care Paravel is the castle in Narnia. Also, she mentions in this line, lateen sails. A lateen sail is a triangular sail that is diagonal to the mast. She talks a lot about ships and birds and a lot of other things you'll see later. I think in the same song she mentions catenaries and dirigibles. A catenary is a curve formed by a wire, a rope, or a chain hanging freely from 2 points and making a U shape. And a dirigible is an airship, kind of like a zeppelin. So catenary is a curve formed by wire, rope, or chain, hanging freely from 2 points and forming a U shape. And a dirigible is an airship like a zeppelin. The next word I want to talk about is darn. Not the normal way people say darn, but there's a line where Joanna says, "And there were I darned with a milk-eyed mender," which is a line that kind of sticks out because her first album, or I think her first main album, is called Milk-Eyed Mender. And it makes sense because to darn is a sewing technique used often to repair holes and to mend. There's a specific stitch called the darning stitch. And I don't know too much about sewing, but it's a specific type of stitch used to mend things. So to darn is to repair by sewing with a specific stitch. Later in this album, in a song called Inflammatory Writ, she has this line where she says, "Give that pen over to me, poetaster." And a poetaster, like the word poet in there, it means a poet, but it means a bad poet. So it's kind of a fun insult to use, to call someone a poetaster. The next word I want to mention is Vestal, which means related to Vesta, which is the Greek or possibly Roman goddess of the home, among other things. But it often refers to the sacred fire of Vesta, which was an eternal Roman fire that was eternally burning. Newsom says, "But that Vestal light, it burns out in the night." So she's referring to an eternal flame, or a not-so-eternal flame. In the same song, she says, "Ululate the lost great American novels." I think that's how you say it, ululate. And ululation is a howl or wail as an expression of strong emotion, typically grief. A howl or wail as an expression of strong emotion, typically grief. So in this line, she's grieving these lost great American novels. Whether they are forgotten or physically lost, we don't know, but she's grieving them. The next word, I don't have a specific line because she has a couple lines and actually a whole song about Cassiopeia, which is a constellation in the sky, in the northern sky, which is named after the queen Cassiopeia in Greek mythology. I actually, when I first heard this song, thought she was saying Casio piano, like the Casio brand of keyboards, which I actually am a big fan of, so I was very confused. Now, moving on to a couple or a few lyrics from the album Ease. The first one I have is gelding. And a gelding is a castrated animal, especially referring to a male horse. And in Monkey and Bear, the song, she says, "What is now known by the sorrel and the roan, by the chestnut and the bay, and the gelding gray." So actually, these are all referring to horses. There's a lot of animals in Monkey and Bear, obviously. And a sorrel is a red horse, and a roan is a white and colored hair horse. Chestnut and bay are different shades of brown, and then the gelding, who is the gray horse, is a castrated male horse. This next line I'm going to read has 2 different vocab words in it, shake, drove a murthering stake in and cleft me right down through my center. Murthering, just like the word it sounds, it means murdering. So I bet they came from the same root. Murthering means murdering. Of course, she's using this in a different way, or she's, in a metaphorical way. And it cleft her down through the center. And cleft means to split or sever, especially along a natural line or grain. So I forget exactly what cleft her in this song, in what the murthering stake is referring to. But it's like something cutting her down and murdering her. The next word I have, which I like a lot, is diluvian, which means flood-like, especially referring to the biblical flood. She says, "Bear shed the mantle of her diluvian shoulders." So this is kind of a strange example phrase to use because, it's metaphorically referring to someone's shoulders as like a flood. She also actually uses the term antediluvian, which was in an early song, "Down the path which one dabbles in the art of antediluvian crafts with yarn and glue." And antediluvian means before the flood, so very ancient. The next word I'm going to be talking about is charlatan. And a charlatan is a person falsely claiming to have special knowledge or skill, or a fraud. Haymonger, nor be his accomplice, that charlatan with artless hustling. So a charlatan is like a swindler or a liar or a fraud. Charlatan. Charlatan. Gibbering is the next word. Gibbering means speaking rapidly and unintelligibly, typically through fear or shock. "Darling, we will be fine, but what was yours and mine appears to me a sandcastle that the gibbering wave takes." Again, this is kind of a poetic way of using this word. That the wave that destroys the sandcastle is gibbering, like, speaking in tongues, kind of, because it's afraid. That's kind of a beautiful thought. And next line I have is, "Well, what is this scrap of sassafras a Sisyphus?" Which I think is a beautiful use of assonance and rhyme. Sassafras is a tree, American tree of the laurel family. But it's known for its bark, which can be made into a drink. And Sisyphus is a legendary figure, and he was punished, and his punishment was to roll a giant stone on the top of a slope, but the stone would always roll back before he got to the top, which is also, you hear that word a lot in the Sisyphean task, something being a Sisyphean task, which means it's endless and difficult and impossible. In the song Cosmia, I think it is, she mentions the kith and the kin, which are related words, because kith means one's friends, acquaintances, and relations, and your kin is your family, like kinfolk kindred. So, in a way, your kith and your kin together are everyone you care about. She mentions that a couple times about the kith and the kin, which I think are really nice words. Earlier in the album, she mentioned the Pleiades. The Pleiades. Though all I know of the rote universe were those Pleiades loosed in December. And the Pleiades are a bright cluster of stars which form the Taurus constellation in the night sky. Pleiades. The next word we have is lissome. And in the lissome light of evening, help me, Cosmia, I'm grieving. And lissome means thin, but also graceful. It's, again, kind of a metaphorical use to describe the evening, but a beautiful one. She also has a line where she says, "Sit and see how the fog from the port in the bay lays like snow at the foot of the Roanoke." And the Roanoke was a colony established in what is now North Carolina in the late 16th century, an English settlement in North America. And it was founded by Sir Walter Raleigh, who is also mentioned in a Beatles song, strangely enough. The Beatles don't have nearly as many references like that. But it's a funny link to both bands. Also, Roanoke is known for disappearing. It kind of mysteriously disappeared, so it's referred to as this lost colony. The next word is obstinate, which means stubbornly refusing to change one's opinions or chosen course of action, despite attempts to persuade one to do so. Newsom says, "The tides of the earth left us bound and calcified, and made us obstinate as obsidian," which is a great turn of phrase. It means to stubbornly refusing to changing one's opinion or chosen course of action, despite attempts to persuade one to do so. Obstinate. The next word is sanatorium, which is a medical facility for long-term illness, often associated with the treatment of tuberculosis. She says, "I roam around the tidy grounds of my dappled sanatorium." A medical facility for long-term illness, most typically associated with the treatment of tuberculosis. The next line I'll talk about. She says, "And half-baked I was brought on a palanquin, made of the many bodies of beautiful woman." A palanquin is usually a bed or a small compartment carried by people to transport somebody. It's also known, or very close to, the idea of a litter. Most commonly, if you see kings or queens or other people in positions of power and positions of opulence being carried along, by servants, it's called a palanquin. The next phrase, or concept, is Ozymandias, which is actually a name for Ramses II, the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt, and known as one of the greatest pharaohs. is actually his Greek name, not his Egyptian name. And he also was a pharaoh whose magnificent works were lost to time. So not too much is known about him. But often when people say Ozymandias, they are referring to Percy Shelley's poem, which was published on the 11th of January, 1818. And that poem has been referenced in a lot of different works, including Breaking Bad. There's an episode, I think, called Ozymandias. The next word is nacre, spelled N-A-C-R-E. You do not take her for a sign in nacre on a stone alone, unfaceted and fine. And that means mother of pearl, which is the organic material produced by some mollusks in their inner shell. It's strong, resilient, and iridescent. So the iridescent mother of pearl type of material you find on mollusk shells is nacre. The next word is capillaries. Capillaries are fine, thin, branching blood vessels that form a network between different blood vessels. Also, it can refer to any thin, hair-like tube. She says, fine capillaries glowing with cars. So again, this is very poetic and talking, kind of like roads being like capillaries. Another word she uses is analectric, which is a funny word. It's like an, meaning like against, and electric. And specifically it means not capable of acquiring a static electric charge when subjected to friction. Made from light from those funny homes, intersected, each enclosed in electric and alone. Analectric, not capable of acquiring a static electric charge when subjected to friction. And the last word I'm going to talk about today is embarcadero. And embarcadero is the Spanish word for a waterfront. Sometimes it refers to a specific waterfront in San Francisco, I think, is people call the Embarcadero. And I know that Joanna Newsom, I'm pretty sure, is from Northern California. So maybe she's referring to that in particular, I don't know. Her line is, the city that turns protracted and slow, and I find myself towing the Embarcadero. That's from I forget what song that's from, but it's a good line. So, I'm going to go through each one of these words again, just to review. Starting with Ys, a mythical city that was swallowed by the ocean. Ys. Ys, a mythical city that was swallowed by the ocean. Cair-Paravel, the fictional castle where the kings and queens of Narnia ruled in the Chronicles of Narnia. Cair-Paravel. Lateen sails, a triangular sail placed diagonal to the mast. Lateen sails. Catenaries, a curve formed by wire, rope, or chain hanging freely from airship like a zeppelin. Catenaries and dirigibles. Darn, to darn. A sewing technique for repairing holes, using a needle and thread alone, employing the darning stitch. Darn, and there where I darn with the milk-eyed mender. Poetaster, a poet, especially a bad poet. Poetaster. Vestal, related to Vesta, goddess of the home, and referring sometimes to the sacred fire of Vesta, an eternal Roman flame. But that vestal light, it burns out with the night. Ululate, a howl or wail as an expression of strong emotion, typically grief. Ululate the lost great American novels. Cassiopeia, a constellation in the northern sky, named after the vain queen Cassiopeia in Greek mythology. Gilding, a castrated animal, typically a male horse. Sorrel, a red horse. Rowan, a horse with a mix of white and colored hairs. Murthering means murdering. Cleft, split or sever something, especially along a natural line or grain. Then the furthermost shake drove a murthering stake in and cleft me right down through my center. Diluvian means flood-like, especially referring to the biblical flood. Antediluvian, before the biblical flood. Charlatan, a person falsely claiming to have a special knowledge or skill, a fraud. Gibbering, speaking rapidly and unintelligibly, typically through fear and shock. Gibbering. Sassafras, an American tree whose bark was used to make a drink. Sisyphus, a figure in mythology who was punished to roll a stone up the top of a slope, but the stone always rolled back down again. Relatedly, the Sisyphean task, which is an endless or unavailing labor or task. Kith, one's friends, acquaintances, and relations. Kith, and related kin, one's family. Your kith and your kin. Pleiades, a bright cluster of stars that forms part of the constellation Taurus. Pleiades. Lissom, thin, supple, and graceful. And the lissom light of evening, help me, Cosmea, I'm grieving. Roanoke, a colony set up in what is now North Carolina by Sir Walter Raleigh, which mysteriously disappeared. Roanoke. Obstinate, stubbornly refusing to change one's opinion or chosen course of action, despite attempts to persuade one to do so. Obstinate. Sanatorium. A medical facility for long-term illness, most commonly associated with the treatment of tuberculosis. Sanatorium. Palanquin. A small compartment carried by people to transport somebody, especially somebody of royalty. Also known as a litter. Palanquin. Ozymandias. The Greek name for the pharaoh Ramses II. Also, the name of a poem by Percy Shelley in the 19th century. Nacre means mother of pearl, the material in some mollusks' inner shells. It's very iridescent and resilient. Nacre. Capillaries. The fine, thin, branching blood vessels. Also, tubes that have very thin and have the appearance of blood vessels. Anelectric. Not capable of acquiring a static electric charge when subjected to friction. Anelectric. Not capable of acquiring a static electric charge when subjected to friction. And lastly, embarcadero, the Spanish word for a waterfront. Embarcadero. So that's all the words that I have. There are a lot more great words that Newsom uses. Maybe I'll make a second video sometime about those. Or possibly some other songwriters, because there's a lot of great songwriters I know who use very interesting words. But anyways, that's all I have for today. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. And I hope you feel more relaxed and have a great night. Thank you so much.